General Motors, headquartered here in Detroit, is even now the largest auto company in the world. It has more than 500,000 employees, 28,000 suppliers. GM has been so rich and so big and so powerful for so long that when this company gets in trouble, people notice. You can't help not noticing. And last year, GM came very close to financial collapse. So the question really should be asked, what has happened to General Motors? What's wrong? And can it be fixed?
Tom and Ray Magliazzi grew up in the 40s and 50s. They own their own garage in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and have a radio show called Car Talk on National Public Radio.
Well, you know, what differentiated all the car companies in those earlier days, we're talking about the 60s or earlier, was styling. I mean, people bought cars not because they thought one was better built or had better reliability. The reliability sucked for all of them. But nobody cared. What they bought the car for was they liked the shape of the 62 Chevy as opposed to the shape of the 62 Ford or Chrysler, and that's what determined which car you bought.
And it's true that General Motors did have great styling. It was a great deal. I mean, when a new car came out, you really didn't care what was under the hood, because what was under the hood was the same as last year and the year before and the year before that. You cared how much horsepower it had. You didn't care about mileage, obviously. You didn't certainly care about safety, but you cared about style, and General Motors cars were great looking. I mean, think of some of those old Cadillacs and some of those old Buicks.
Oh.
You know, you get some, take it easy.
In the 1970s, the world GM had dominated for decades was rapidly changing. The Arab oil embargo, the energy crisis, gasoline lines, and the Japanese small car invasion all challenged GM's traditional assumption that big was always better.
We don't do little well in this country because we have a big mentality.
See,
we don't do little. We don't know how to make things little because it isn't part of our culture. In Japan, it's part of their culture. Everything's little. They have a little country. It's a crowded country, and to make little cars was a natural consequence of those things. But for us to start making little cars, it's not in our psyche. It's not in there.
And then the Beatles arrived.
Okay, so you're not impressed. Yet.
With the advent of the Volkswagen, GM belatedly, almost reluctantly, set out to make a small car, the Corvair. Ed Cole, the man who created the '55 Chevy, got the assignment. But this time, he did not have the full cooperation of the company. When the sporty Corvair first appeared in 1959, it suffered from cost cuts and compromises. The rear-engine car had a dangerous tendency to spin out. In 1965, when Ralph Nader exposed the Corvair in his book Unsafe at Any Speed, he ushered in an era of auto safety and government regulation and changed General Motors forever.
The thing that GM people would constantly tell critics whenever they talked to them was, look, we're the biggest auto company in the world. We make the most money and profits of any auto company in the world. Who is anybody to tell us what to do?
We just weren't humble and modest enough to say it starts with people, getting the right people. If you have an authoritarian plant manager running each of our existing plants, you can't put in the new team concepts that Toyota taught us is the way to do things now. So we didn't do it the right way. We had the knowledge, but we didn't have the will. It was a culture in which people wanted to tell the truth. Young, bright people wanted to say, this is the problem, we've got to get to the root of the problem. But the culture was, don't come to me with bad news.
When you are king of the hill, when you are the biggest company in the United States, when you have been perceived for decades to be the biggest and the best, you become a victim of human nature, and it's as old as history. Success breeds arrogance and complacency, and they had a dose of that in the 80s that you couldn't touch.
They didn't say people want a small, reliable, comfortable car. They said people want a cheap car. Make a car that's cheap.
And it seems almost as if they, in years past, and I hope it isn't true in the future, that they've gone out of their way to buy some of the cheaper stuff.
Yeah, because Roger Smith said wherever you can save a tenth of a penny, save it. Reliability doesn't matter. The image that you create with the customer doesn't matter. If you can save a tenth of a penny, save it.
But didn't they know it was suicide? I mean, didn't you
No,
have
but you
to
know why? Because
No.
they're stupid.
General Motors can develop a non-polluting car entirely on its own when it wants to. Meet the Impact, GM's electric-powered vehicle. The Impact can accelerate from 0 to 60 in 8 seconds. It can race along at up to 75 miles per hour, and there is not a whiff of tailpipe exhaust. None. Roger Smith unveiled the Impact with great fanfare, and General Motors announced it would start mass producing the car by 1995 at a factory in Lansing, Michigan. But last December, Jack Smith pulled the plug on the electric car. Now only 50 are scheduled for production. Jeananne Sharpless is chairwoman of the California Air Resources Board. Her mission to eradicate smog in California makes her the world's #1 promoter of electric vehicles.
We've known for years and years that the car companies have been doing research and development on electric vehicles. You know, the U.S. put an electric vehicle on the moon 20 years ago.
And the lunar landing vehicle was produced by General Motors.
I'm not sure the game is all over yet in California. I'm not sure things have unfolded as they ultimately will. In fact, I think California is one of the landmark places where we're seeing a very healthy confrontation between economic and environmental forces.
What I hear this gentleman saying is that, you know, it doesn't matter how much lead time we give them, they can't do it, or maybe they don't want to do it.
Maybe electric vehicles will be great sometime, but I don't think they're going to be ready for 1998 and in mass consumption.
The car companies have traditionally stuck with the technology that they know, and what they know is the internal combustion engine. And it's real difficult to make change, as we all know. None of us like to make change, but change is going to happen. And unfortunately, if Detroit doesn't get out and see what's going on in the rest of the world, maybe the world's just going to pass them right by.
There is a footnote to this story. Once upon a time, Los Angeles was not shrouded in smog. It had one of the best electric streetcar systems in the country. But the electric trolleys disappeared, and that was no accident.
The streetcar didn't fail because of demographics or economics. It failed because General Motors killed it.
What happened in Los Angeles happened in many cities. General Motors conspired with oil and tire companies to dismantle electric trolley lines across America.
The whole concept came from General Motors. They would go in, they'd buy a street railway system,
they'd convert it to General Motors buses, the General Motors buses would run on Firestone tires, and they'd be fueled by, in the East, Phillips, and in the West, Standard Oil, California. It was a great scheme. You know, it was a tremendous scheme for selling a very large amount of automotive products.
In 1947, the federal government charged General Motors and its partners with criminal conspiracy.
The result, however, was that General Motors was fined $5,000. And its key official, who was an assistant secretary of General Motors, one of the people who was intimately involved in this whole operation, was fined the magnanimous sum of $1. Right. Now, you got to compare that with the damage that was done. Los Angeles today is trying to begin rebuilding its rail system, right? And their fondest projection is that perhaps in 20 years, they'll be able to rebuild at least part of it at a cost of $150 billion. And this is the legacy of what GM left us with.